How's it going, everybody? Session here. Welcome back to Eureka Orthos Solo. This is the guide, kind of showcasing the next set of floors, 11 through 20. This will be more focusing on the actual mobs that will come across throughout the floor, and kind of, to kind of figure out what to expect and how to handle opponents as you see them too. So essentially, with 11 through 20, it's not really too bad in terms of the mobs that you'll encounter, but there are still a couple of things that you might see that might be a little bit of like a trick. So with the Spirulina, it's hard to pronounce, honestly. As far as I'm aware, these are mobs that I want to say they don't do anything, but as far as I'm aware, there's really not too much that come from these little guys. So I would say, in terms of just functionality as a whole, taking these out one by one is really easy. I'm taking them on as a pair at the moment too, and it's also pretty straightforward. So I want to say that they have essentially that they have different telegraphed attacks that you might encounter. But that being said, though, not an issue. Now, this Keter is the first patrol mob that you'll come across, and as you saw, it has a cone attack called Glass Punch, and I think that's also the majority of that as well. I think the ticket with Glass Punch is that it does hit very hard as an attack compared to other mobs that might have either like a gaze or some kind of attack that you don't really worry all too much about. But that attack does hit pretty hard. I think also if it hits you, it does a knockback also. But either way, though, as a patrol mob, it's still pretty easy to handle, take out once in a while. I would say, of course, because the Glass Punch is a cone attack, taking them on compared, in multitudes, it can be a bit tricky depending on what you come across, but still nothing you can't handle. The Morbo, it's a Morbo, so I think it's pretty circumstantially easy to understand that this thing will do a giant cone attack. It's going to be called Bad Breath. That will, similar to the other variations of Bad Breath you probably came across through other dungeons or any kind of fight that kind of has one, Bad Breath will hit you with every debuff. There's nothing additional that comes with it, so it's not like you get an attack and get hit. It just does, silence, paralysis, the whole 9 yards, blindness, etc. And the timing for it is also pretty much the same too. So the Vine Probe is technically an attack that it doesn't really serve as a tank buster, but it does just hit you on top of autos. So sometimes it just has a double attack, and that's what Vine Probe does. But either way, it's still nothing to really worry too much about. So Bad Breath is a really easy telegraph to keep an eye out for. Even though the cone is really large, you don't really have to worry too much about fighting those, especially when they're in, even in multitudes of like 2 or 3. As long as you just kind of have them all kind of bunch up in a spot, taking those on is pretty easy to go about. And you'll see me here too. Like I try and take them on in pairs, just because it kind of goes through quicker to get the key open, to get into the next room, and kind of make some space and figure it out as well. So we will be burning through that as well pretty easily. And I use it as well to just kind of level up, because we're still technically not 90 yet, going into level 11. I think we're like level 84 or something. So the Netzach that's back there, it's essentially a similar mob to a lot of what you've already seen. The cone that it does is slightly larger than normal. As you can see here with Creeping Hush, it's also a bit wider too, so just keep an eye out for that. It's really easy for these mobs for you to just kind of get to the sides whenever it does the cast attack. That way, if you're playing like melee, you can do your positionals, or or not at all, just true north. But again, with the Creeping Hush attack as a whole, that's like really the only thing that it has going for itself. Nothing to worry about. Moving on into the next floor, again, we'll be seeing a little bit of the similar things that we come across as normal, so again, nothing really too crazy to be worried about. 12, I think, is, again, similar to just the first floor, so you just gotta kind of burn through it in the same fashion. Moving on to 13, again, more bulls. We got the Patter in the back there, same guys. This first, however, introduces the microsystem. Now, it's kind of like an orb that kind of flies around looking like the older Allegan technology stuff. Piercing Laser is a line AoE that's a telegraph you can see. The cast for it is also pretty long, but the distance it covers is also long as well, so you just got to be careful to not kind of bait it in a hallway, because that range that it covers can be pretty extensive, and it can catch you off guard. But it's still, because it's a thin line in comparison to like a wider cone, usually it's easy to just, again, like dodge to the side, avoid it, move on forward. You should be okay. So yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much the same consistency of mechanics you'll be seeing. A lot of it is still pretty... I got turned into an owl, that's really unfortunate. A lot of the mechanics you'll be seeing, again, are very similar to each other. And then that's only real beauty to it. The real difference, of course, is that the mobile, instead of it giving you damage by the cone, it gives you debuffs. So, you know, in some case scenarios, like the combination of those debuffs, if you do get caught in them somehow, along with other things that are trying to attack you, getting out of other attacks are what's going to be the problem, per se. But, again, the strategy of taking on one at a time usually ends up being the really easy way to just kind of go about it. So we can just kind of keep on fast-forwarding onward and just kind of getting ourselves into the next floor. So again, more Netzach, you know, they're kind of just roaming about, nothing too crazy. You really don't worry about anything until you encounter the Wood Golem, which is the next patrol, replacing, you know, the other guys. So they have that line attack, and again, easy to dodge. Keep an eye out for just the patrol, you know, in case it doesn't like sneak up behind you, or, you know, doesn't do anything to kind of like catch you off guard. Because again, patrols usually end up being scarier than you realize, just because if your camera is fixated on the target you're fighting and it comes in from behind you, sometimes you don't really expect it to do what it's going to be doing. But thankfully, though, you'll kind of get the indication of that, oh, I see you, right, so it might attack you. And you can just handle it appropriately. So now the Belladonna essentially has, I think it's 2 attacks, but it has this circle telegraph attack that it's going to target you with, called Shadow Burst. As far as I was aware, that attack hurts really hard. So of course, as per usual, you know, because there's a telegraph attack, just make the assumption that it'll hit you, it'll hurt, it'll kill you, and you can also bait it pretty easily to just allow you to maintain max melee, as I see here. So what I'll do is I'll be max melee and then have the Shadow Burst target me, and then as it casts the attack, I'll just get behind it and I can continue to do my attack and my damage, and then, you know, not really be too worried about it. Now, of course, similar to some of the mobs we've dealt with in the first floor, that circle will target anybody that's, like, you know, in aggro of it. So even if you're in like a party, for example, you know, if 2 people are attacking it, it might just, if you know there's like a tank and like a healer, if the tank has aggro, it might just target the healer, right? So it's a matter of just, if you see it on you, just get out of the way, you can move on forward with it, and again, not too big of a deal. So the Belladonna was, again, one of those mobs that I think I encountered, and I tried to figure out, like, oh, like, how much does this hurt when they shot me with a Shadow Burst, and it killed me, and I was like, cool, I understand this now. It's nothing to you know, to gawk over. So moving on to 15, again, we kind of have a lot of the same mobs from before. We have the Microsystem, Belladonna, the Wood Golem. Of course, you know, some of the mobs that you do encounter are random, so it's just a matter of watching them kind of swap the encounters you might run into. So again, nothing too particularly crazy, and at this point, you know, this is a really good set of floors where if you have like a fortune or an affluence, everything in this set of floors are pretty easy to deal with. It's just a matter of you know, not getting caught, you know, with your tail between your legs, if you will, and fighting multiple things at the same time, because the problem too is, like, time is a factor, and that's the only real challenge going through these set of floors. And as long as you can maintain your time while going through everything, then again, this set of floors is still a really good floor to just kind of burn through and pick up anything and everything that you can. So fighting Wood Golems isn't really too big of a deal. Got turned into an owl again. So I would say this is the first floor where you actually want to be a bit careful about what you encounter and what you deal with. The Rafflesia and the Orthos System B are the 2 mobs that you start realizing, like, okay, I just got to make sure that I don't run into anything crazy. And the Orthos Soldier that's back there as well can really, you know, put a damper on some of your plans if you're trying to just progress through. So once we get ourselves involved in those mobs, you'll see it. So the Orthos System uses Gravity Field. That actually is an extremely hard-hitting attack, so avoid that. Orthos Soldier will do Head Spin, and it's going to do an AoE around itself, so you want to get out of that range. It isn't max meleeable, so you have to just play it safe, run out of the circle. The cast is a little quick, so you just want to make sure you don't get caught in that. You'll be seeing another version of that in the next set of floors we'll talk about, and that one is much more dangerous and much scarier, but still, you know, not too terrible. The Rafflesia is here, and again, these mobs kind of start having these similarities. it has that attack that it looks like a tank buster, but it's actually not. It's a single target attack, so it's nothing to really worry about. And then it, of course, has the circle AoE drop that it'll target a person that's nearby. So again, if you see it on you with the gold dust, literally just get out of the way, move on forward with it, and it's not too big of a deal. However, fighting these in multitudes can feel a bit overwhelming. So you just got to be careful. That attack, of course, will still hurt really, really, really hard if you get hit by it. But still, you just want to be able to make sure that when it does the circle attack, again, you can just easily move out of the way. Don't try and play it dangerously if you don't think you can. The key to Orthos solo or any deep dungeon solo is to just play it safe all the way through. And that's just pretty much the TLDR of that situation right there. Now, moving on to the 17th floor, again, we're going to be encountering more Orthos bees, you know, at least in this variant we encounter. I really don't think that there's too much between 17 to 19. I think 19 and 18 might have a couple of different mobs, but again, we'll definitely have to kind of play it and see what we run into. At this point, I got pacified and silenced, so we just sat here just not doing anything crazy. So I just took my time and kind of run through it. Let's see what else we might go into here. I think that this floor was like full of Orthos bees, and I think that's what it boils down to. Is like if you encounter a bunch of these at one time, being safe it becomes a little bit trickier in some case scenarios. That's crazy. Now moving on to our level 18, that's a treasure room, thankfully enough. Back there was an Ortho Hunter. The groundskeepers are, I think these are the new mobs, or the new patrols rather. So these things will do kind of like a double-handed like shot attack. It doesn't do anything outside of just hitting like the normal target that it runs into. I actually don't think that it's that different from, it's not too different from the Ortho Soldier. It does the neck spin, and it'll twist around to its attack, but after that though, again, pretty straightforward. I think those things look tanky, but they're actually kind of fragile by comparison, so you can easily just do what you gotta do. Now, this was me kind of showcasing the pulling a treasure room. I think whenever you encounter a treasure room, no matter what it is, you always want to try and grab these. So I use a lethargy, which will slow down everyone's movement speed and their cast ability speed. So it's easy to just grab everything and not have to worry about them hitting me with their attacks since it takes so long. And because it was going to take a while for them to actually, try and catch me with their attacks, it was easy for me to just, I'll use my AoE combos. And like I said before, in scenarios where you're targeting, 2 or maybe 3 things, taking out one at a time usually becomes more fruitful. But in this case scenario, since it's a treasure room and, I have like a fortune up and I have a haste buff currently too, so all my things are faster. I do want to, maximize damage with my AoEs. But of course, as I start to dwindle the numbers from what was like 5 down to like 2 or 1, then eventually, of course, I will go back into single targeting everything. The Ortho Hunter is the next mob that you kind of see, and the Sawtooth is back there as well. But the Ortho Hunter, nothing really too scary to look at. It does attack. I think it might attack a little faster than normal compared to other mobs. But the Ortho Hunter, this thing is not really too much of a worry. I think it's actually really easy to pull those. The Sawtooth, as you kind of just saw, it has an attack that's a cone attack called Dissever. Again, it's just an attack that's a cone. It'll hit you. It kind of hurts. Just make sure that you do everything in your power to avoid the scenario of getting caught by it, especially if there's more than one. However, if you get behind it, as you just saw that tail attack, there is going to become a moment throughout Orthos where you start learning that mobs will basically try and target you with their front attack, and then if you use the tactic of getting behind them, they do have a surprise backup attack. And the backup attack is usually what ends up hurting most runs because you might be distracted from taking out, whatever mobs are around, and then the front attack happens, and then the back attack might be the surprise attack. So it's important to keep those in mind about which ones do what. Now, because the Sawtooth is lethargic, and it tried using the front cone, because I stood behind it for a while, it's going to use its back tail swipe. Now, usually the back tail swipe is faster than the front. So you just got to be careful to, like I said, don't get caught by them, just because it's really easy to not really pay attention in the moment. Because one thing that I would say is if you have lethargy on, remember that if something respawns, it does not have lethargy, so it will have the normal cast speed of attacks. Like technically this hunter, is not lethargy because it's spawned in this room, despite the Sawtooth still being hit with the lethargy. So again, just play it safe and just... This is why I feel like in a lot of case scenarios, if your confidence isn't like booming with just, you know, just oozing in confidence, then just play it safe. Even in this scenario of playing a treasure room, you'll definitely see it in the future. There's a moment in time where I'm in a high level floor, I find a treasure room, and I try and run the same tactic, and it gets me killed. Because I tried to use the cast speed of attacks as a way to maximize my pull rate and affectation towards getting the all the treasure, but because the attacks are either one shot or they have some kind of crazy caveat to them, like it just gets me killed. So even when you think that you can't handle it, just play it safe and do what you got to do. Sometimes you got to just throw a backup out there and then just, you know, use a storms or a witching just to kind of save yourself some time and effort to not get caught by an attack that could potentially hurt you like dramatically. So just be careful with how you handle treasure rooms. But I say after that though, because of the lethargy, like I'm just playing it very very cautious but dangerous at the same time. You know, I want to take out things that, in bulk, but I also want to try and make sure I'm not getting hit and caught under by really easy attacks that just could instantly kill me. Finally, you know, we have the 19th floor. Again, it's a lot of mobs that we've already seen from floor 17 and 18. So it's just a matter of going through it. It's, again, nothing too crazy. You just got to make sure that you, if you find a treasure room, take it out. If you find any kind of chest nearby, just grab them if you can. And that way you can kind of get yourself into floor 20, which is, of course, the boss. Now, this boss is the cloning node. Several things that you'll notice is that there are dragons that are kind of out here. They will eventually be, I guess, cloned and brought onto the platform. They all do cone attacks, and what you'll notice with the cloning node is the node pretty much stays in the middle of the arena the entire time, and it's going to essentially put power into the dragons that will appear and make them do cone attacks. Now, thankfully, for this being a level 24 boss, the boss doesn't hit all too much. However, it is overwhelming to start getting hit multiple times because it's just going to kind of snowball into making like many careless errors. And like I said, as much as you can try and uptime this, it's just easy to play it safe when you just don't really know what's safe. So as you see here, offensive command is the first attack it's going to do. It's going to bring in 3 dragons. Now, like I said, they're going to start to do these cones. The cones are all the same proximity and trajectory in what they cover. There's never a moment where the map will be fully covered by cones where it's unavoidable. You're always going to be able to avoid the cone. So when it's 3 like this is only going to happen once, really, because the process is that they're going to start bringing in dragons that aren't there, so there's 5 more. So when you start seeing 5 tethers, obviously, it gets really chaotic. But my hint to this is, like, if you see that this... See how this tether at, like, a 90-degree angle, right, is like, there's nothing here, right? And same thing on this side, too. This is just... There's just not enough ground being covered, so this whole section is kind of unsafe, right? But because the dragon that was over here by himself, see, because like all these 4 spots, there's nothing. This dragon isn't targeting this side. So because this dragon is by itself, this is going to give you the most space to be free. You'll see it on the other side too, where there's a lot less ground to cover because there's like 2 spots here and 2 spots there, but there's 2 spots over here. But these spots look a little bit wider compared to these 2. My honest, well, they kind of look all the same, but either way. My advice would be to just get near a dragon that's basically using a cone, but as long as another dragon isn't looking at it, then that way you can understand that that's safe. So, for example, in this case scenario, because this dragon was here basically by itself and there were 2 across from it, obviously the 2 dragons that were here and to the opposite side were literally, you know, they were facing each other. You know that neither of those dragons were safe. So as long as there's no dragon facing itself on 2 opposite sides, that side can be considered safe to some degree, like being on the side of the trajectory of the cone for the dragon. The cloning node itself will do piercing laser, which again is a line attack you saw from the microsystem from earlier, and then it's going to do a command called order relay. Now order relay will always use all 8 dragons, but in pairs of 4. So there's always going to be one dragon that's kind of by itself, and then the other 3 that are next to each other. So as you see here, that dragon's alone, and there's no dragons next to it that are casting, and then there's 3 that are touching each other, or that are close to each other rather, in terms of using their flame. And then the other 4 that aren't being used are going to be used next. So it's going to be, you know, a series of 4 breath attacks, and then another series of 4 breath attacks. So as you can see, there is a lot of space that's open and safe as long as you understand, you know, where to stand. My recommendation is you go to the side where the one dragon is, that's basically by itself. Because the coverage of the other 3 are going to cover a lot of space, there is this max melee uptime area that's really easy to just stand by. So you want to see, if you see like the 3 here, and then there's the 1, you want to be basically near the dragon with the 1. And literally it's going to rinse and repeat itself on both sides. So I move over, although I moved over incorrectly, but you can move over to the other side. The dragon that shot the solo cone by itself, that's the safe side. So you can just literally maintain max uptime the entire time for that part of the mechanic. And you'll see order relay a couple of times too, so it'll be honestly good practice. And thankfully, you know, because this boss fight is just full of vulnerability ups, the dangerous aspect of doing this dungeon is that the attacks that come from the dragon, they don't hurt, like I said, but they give you vuln up stacks. So avoiding those as much as you can is always usually pretty key. In this case scenario, you use a 5 cone. So what you can do in this case scenario is you go to where there's like 4 dragons that are basically near each other, and then there's the 1. You want to stand essentially, you see how they kind of have them 4 that are all kind of perpendicular to each other, but then there's one dragon that's kind of not directly across, like in a center way. It doesn't look centered, right? This one looks like it's by itself in a weird spot. You want to just stand in between any of the 4 dragons, but with the side that also has the 5th dragon. So to kind of elaborate that a little bit more easier, so because these 4 dragons are going to use the cone attack, and the dragon is over here, like I said, this one is not, this one's across this dragon. So if you think about it like 1, 2, 3, 4, you essentially want to stand across whichever dragon is connected to the tether for this one. So technically this one here and the second tether is they're opposites to each other. You want to run between the between like 3 and 4. So in the case scenario of like if 1 and 2 were active, right, and then the dragon was touching 1, then standing between 2 and 3 would be safe. So because 2 is opposite of wherever the 1 dragon was alone, 3 and 4 is safe. So you can just stand there, and that's also going to be like, it's not max uptime melee wise, but it's still, it's the closest and most space you'll get pretty much. So here again, order relay, you know, there's a 3, there's the 1 that's open here, you stand on the side that's the 1, and then you'll see the cones kind of go off. This whole area is pretty much safe, and I'm going to dip and go to the left side, which again, not safe, but the right side, as you kind of saw it over here, this quadrant was safe pretty much. So it's easy to just kind of you know, you do like a curve, if you will, into the right side and then be safe from that situation. So that's pretty much it. Honestly, this boss is actually really easy in comparison to the first one. I think the first one is harder than the second one, like just by a smidge, mostly because even if you get the vuln ups from the dragons, they don't really hurt enough for you to not just recover easily, and to a degree as well, like you don't absolutely need to use Orthos potions as much. With the first boss, you have to use Orthos potions like pretty much every time it uses Mantra Storm. But after that though, boss isn't really too crazy. So hopefully you find that guide useful. We'll be going into 21 moving forward after this, and that way, that's where things get a little bit spicy, so you gotta be careful. But like I said, I hope you find the guide useful. Let me know if you have any questions or anything that I can elaborate a little bit further on. I'd be happy to do so in the comments. So thank you for watching, and take care.